Hello and welcome to another Outer Hour. I'm Tom London, your host for the next 60 minutes. We've got great brains on the show tonight. Lukhona Mnguni, the head of policy and research at the Rivonia Circle, will join us. Dr. Michael Louis will join us, the chairperson of One South Africa and the CEO of Outer, Wayne Duvenage, will be on the air with you tonight as we discuss, well, what could quite possibly or probably be the future of South African politics, coalition politics. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to know what you've got to think about coalition politics and what your questions may be around the topic. Let's bash this around for the next 60 minutes, shall we, with Wayne, Lukhona and Michael and yourself as you pop your comments in the comments section down below this video. Don't forget to say hello to your moderators. Looking after you in the Facebook feed tonight is Masejo. Say hello to Masejo. Make friends with her. And then Samantha van Nispen, the head of marketing and comms at Outer, is taking care of you in the YouTube feed. Say how's it to Sam and make China's. I'll say hello to you in just a moment, but let's say hello to Wayne Duvenage, the CEO of Outer. Hello, Wayne.
Hi there, Tom, and to our viewers. I think I said Happy New Year last year, but it's an old year already.
It feels like another year has come in the last month or so.
Exactly. No, the year has got off to a big bang. Looking forward to a lovely show. Thanks to Lukhona and Michael for joining us in what is becoming a topic with many views, and hopefully we can clear that up. Or clear a lot of the questions that we have and concerns around coalition politics, which is going to be with us for a long time. It has already been with us for a long time in local government, and more so in local government. But the big question is 2024, 18 months or so away. And let's get into the conversation. So nice to be here with you and all our viewers.
Thank you, Wayne. And I'm sure everyone's going to say hello to you in that comment section. Say how's it to Wayne. Wayne's normally in the comment section. Wayne, before we start with the topic of coalition politics, the big news story today is that the tourism minister is proposing spending, is it R1 billion on sponsoring or partly sponsoring Tottenham Hotspurs? And everyone is commenting on this, so I thought we should get Outer's comment as well.
Yeah, well, firstly, as a Man United supporter, I think it's a waste of money. But, getting serious, though, look, it's not so much the minister. She's not supposed to be, and she says she isn't interfering with the powers of the SA Tourism Board, who need to make this decision. But the Daily Maverick article today features quite a lot, and maybe she's in the background, maybe she isn't. The question is this. Given the situation that our country faces itself in, is this right? But secondly, you've got to not have this knee-jerk emotional reaction. Of course, we could spend R1 billion fixing potholes, dealing with flood damage, and so much other good stuff, giving fuel to Eskom. But, department has a budget, and we do need tourists, and we need marketing for tourists. The question we have is 38% of SA Tourism's budget, marketing budget for the next 3 years, tied up in a deal with Tottenham Hotspurs, where 25% in the UK market is our inbound tourism, and we could do so much better with that marketing. And the other concerns are that the Tourism Business Council, which gives a lot of money, millions of rands a year to SA Tourism, and that is funded by the tourism industry, they know nothing about this. And they need to have this close partnership with SA Tourism to market this country more effectively. So there's too many question marks, yet we believe this deal is in the making, and I think there's going to be a lot of heat around it. So watch the space for the next few days. Hot off the press, we've just put out our statement, and we're going to be watching this.
I was this afternoon when I was reading the story, and I was thinking, what would I do with R1 billion when it comes to tourism? You could buy 10,000 air tickets for people in the UK to fly out to this country, and if each one of them just brought £500, you'd make your money back. If they brought £1,000 with them, you would double your investments. I mean, just that Springs boy logic at work, but it is quite a story. I'm sure we're going to follow that. All right, let's say hello to our viewers quickly, and then I'll introduce you to the guests. Madeline Gutsch is our chief whip tonight. Well done, Madeline. Who else have we got on board? We'll just say hello very quickly to a couple of people, and then we'll pop the other names up on screen. Fikile Dada, Fix is on board. Claire Feldman is with us. Hi, Claire. Who else have we got? Brenda Doyle says, good evening. Hello, Brenda. Nice to have you with us. Don't forget to like and share this program. Rachel Fisher out of Cape Town joins us this evening. Freddie Mills says, hello, guys and girls. Hello, Freddie. Alex Helshope says, hello, outer team. Madeline Gutch says, hi, Marsha, Sam and Wayne. Lily Bash says, hello, Outarians, and more are joining us. Sue Truebody, good evening all. Michael Billsbury, where are you? Everyone waits for Michael Billsbury out of the Eastern Cape. Devaney Davids, the show's producer, is on board, and we'll look for one more. Janine Blake says, good evening, everybody. Say hello as you join us this evening, and your moderators will say, how's it back? Okay, let's get into the conversation, which is coalition politics in the future South Africa. And to join us this evening, we welcome Lukhona Mnguni back to the show, Head of Policy and Research at the Rivonia Circle. How's it, Lukhona? Good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Tom. Good evening to you, and good evening to the viewers out there. I suppose, well, it's February now. Maybe we can't say Happy New Year anymore.
No. Although I still find myself saying Happy New Year to people all the time. Let's also say hello to Dr. Michael Louis, who joins us tonight. Michael, welcome to the show. You might be on mute, Michael. Hello? There we go.
Sorry, Tom.
No worries. How's it? Welcome to the show.
I don't know what's going on. A person should think we're used to it by now. Good evening, Tom, and welcome to all the viewers. And really, I'm a fan of my participant colleagues tonight. And so we're going to have a great debate. Very important topic. I'm very passionate about it. And so hopefully the listeners are going to get out what we're going to talk about tonight.
Dr. Louis is the chairperson of One South Africa. Well, let's start with the concept of coalition governments and the impact when it comes to coalition governments on a country compared to single-party governments. I'm going to start with you, Lukhona. Just explain this concept of coalition governments. It's something we're not familiar with on a national level, but when it comes to the city of Johannesburg, for example, we have a good idea of what a coalition government looks like. We'll talk about Joburg in the show, I'm sure. But just bring us up to speed with this concept of coalition governments.
No, thank you, Tom, very much. Maybe it's also because we suffer short memories at times. Coalition governments have been with us since 1994. Two provinces have been governed by coalition governments in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Western Cape itself, before the DA could manage a clean breakthrough to govern, with a majority. So this is not a new phenomenon. So what happens is that in countries where, there's democracy and there are more than two political parties contest, you tend to have outcomes where none of those parties has been declared a clear winner by the electorate. So you find that voters vote, and if the legislation says, for example, for a single party to govern the jurisdiction, whether it's a municipality, it's a province, or nationally, it needs 50% plus one. If failure to get that 50% plus one, may need a situation where two or more parties cooperate together and form an understanding of how they can co-govern, and therein a coalition government is born. What that means effectively is that, in theory, you would hope that political parties coalesce around a set of, values, ideas, policy priorities, and so forth. But it doesn't always turn out that way, as we have seen, and I think we will get into that conversation. But coalition governments in and of themselves are not something that you choose. You don't go, I've been saying recently, you don't go to a supermarket and take a coalition government out of the shelf. You are forced into considering a coalition government once the electorate has not made a clear choice of which political party should govern by 50% plus one. And of course, what is important, some people might ask, then why have I seen in my ward a councillor winning with 42%. And that's because in the ward election, what we have is called a first past the post, which means whoever has the biggest share of the vote wins, because that's a constituency, it's a direct election. And somebody might say, but I've seen other countries where presidents go for what is called a runoff election, when there isn't a clear winner at 50% plus one. And again, that's because only one singular person or one individual can occupy the position of president. So those are directly elected presidents, what we call presidential systems. So where you've got a parliament and you've got, multi-party democracy, there tends to be a need for a coalition. Of course, in some instances, the talks to establish a coalition government can collapse to such a great extent that you have to rerun the elections altogether. And that's the risk, the biggest risk of a coalition that does not work. And we've seen this in some municipalities, for example, where to local municipality following the 2016 local government municipality elections, they couldn't put together a government, and the provincial MEC for Kokta had to dissolve that municipality and go for a rerun. So I'm just saying these are the ways in which you put up coalitions, but some people may have questions to say, but I've seen people winning without 50%, and those are the differences that are there.
Well, you taught me something tonight. Thank you for that foundation for the show. Perfect. We'll get to your comments in a moment. I see the question has been asked by Outer, and you can pop your answers in the comment section down below the video. What are your thoughts on coalition governments in the South African context? Give it a bit of a think and then write a brief answer down. If it's short enough, we'll put it up on screen, but I'll read them out in just a few minutes. What do you think of coalition governments in the South African context? Looking for your answers down below the video. Well, let's talk about coalition governments at a national level, shall we? I'm going to ask the three participants tonight to give us an answer on this one. What would a coalition government that excludes the ANC in positions of power do for the economy or the efficiency of the state? Let's start with Dr. Michael Louis. Michael, what do you think would happen if we had a coalition government at national level?
Well, Tom, Lukuna gave a good background in the sense is that I think that there's a very big difference between theory and practice. And I think one of the big benefits that I've had is that I've actually been a participant in a coalition governments in the Western Cape in the 1994 to 1996 years. And those viewers that know, it was the time, if you can remember of Hannes Kriel and Peter Murray and the changes of the premiership. I was in the legislature at that time. Okay. But I was a member of the ACDP, the Christian Democrats. I was the member of parliament then, but I was also chairman nationally of the ACDP, and so very much a participant in coalition governments. And I must say that I really believe that in those years, in a new democracy, really, in a new South Africa, it was an incredible few years of really making a difference and not feeling the fighting for power. It's amazing how it happened, and that they chose individuals that can contribute on expertise and on value-driven values more than on looking for power and who can form a power. And so that's why in Johannesburg, I'm really just concerned. I know we're going to talk later maybe about it, that they've chosen an executive that's from a minority party just because they wanted to clinch a deal and they negotiated the power base. But in my years in the coalition government, it wasn't like that at all. I didn't have any power, but I did have a contribution to play by value, by my expertise and the value I could bring to the table. And that's why on a national and a provincial level, I really believe it can work. I really believe that the whole move to a new electoral system and independent candidates, that we need to get new voices and new players onto the playing field. We need to get expertise. And if those expertise don't belong to a political party, because most people think that I'm an anti-political party person, which I'm not, I'm pro political parties, but I do believe that individuals that have got expertise, whether it's healthcare, education, and whatever, can add a huge difference. And I'm really a case in point where I was one person and really could add a lot of value, because the real debate happens in the standing committees. And in the standing committees in Parliament, there's no power bases there, because whether you one person or 10 people, your contribution is always valued, always taken note of, and you can really make a difference.
Thank you. Lukhona, are you also a believer? Coalition politics at a national level? Can it work?
I'm a believer in competitive politics. And if competitive politics produce a coalition government, then so be it. Coalitions are at times important to create points of trade-offs, but you need to create those trade-offs within the realm of shared values. So there has to be a social contract that all political players tend to accept as non-negotiable. So if you look, for example, in some of the Scandinavian countries where social democracy or social democratic values, let's not say where social democracy is the thing, where social democratic values, where there are certain things that people agree on. The state must always cater for its citizens to the best possible, quality education, quality healthcare, and other social services, to make sure that there is a basket of public goods that are availed to both poor and rich, and they are accessed in the same facilities, and that the opportunities to opt out of the public service are really for those who may feel some type of way, but the quality, it's not because of the poor quality of the public services that they receive. So coalitions are able to help us negotiate those kind of values, but there has to be an anchoring thing that we agree on. And I think what makes things difficult in South Africa is that the conversation isn't even about, what are the values we agree on. I mean, I interviewed the leader of Al Jamaa on my show on Sunday, and I asked him, I said, are you going to publish a coalition agreement? And he said, there's no agreement, we just trust each other, and that we trust the person that is going to do the right thing. Now, this is quite bizarre, because it means that the political actors are not trying to achieve some consensus around shared values and shared priorities, which then informed the type of spending that then gets to happen, and budgeting that gets to happen, and communities that become the focal point of that particular government. And I think we have a long way to go in South Africa, not because we cannot achieve those things, even if sourcing them out of our social contract, which is the constitution of the republic, but I think we just have political players who are completely distracted and seek political power for its own sake and their own self-interest, rather than seeking the political power as a tool for service to society.
I'm thinking back to 1994 when we called our government a government of national unity. That word unity is a very powerful word. And as you talk, I'm thinking of 2023, and if let's move ahead to 2024. If we had a coalition government, what would the theme be? At the moment, I can't see one. But let's ask Wayne Duvenage. Wayne, coalition government 2024. All the opposition parties get together. Would it help?
Yeah, look, and I think Lukhona makes a good point. If you don't have agreements, strong agreements that are values-based, then they don't work. And that's what we see happening in some of these cities. And I must say, and maybe Michael can correct me here, but I've heard so much very recently in the media about coalitions. Look at what's happening in Joburg and Ekurhuleni and a couple other places. It's never going to work. We must stay away from coalitions. But they don't realize that there's another 35 or so coalitions right now throughout South Africa in the local government level that are working. Of course, there are going to be hiccups. And these are the school fees that I think we have to pay. We're learning, because this is relatively new at the extent that we're experiencing it now, in the eyes and minds of a lot of people who weren't around to watch it unfolding in the Western Cape at the time. So I think if you have strong agreements, and they are values-based, and we talk about then, well, what does this do for efficiency and the economy of the state? I think this is a great opportunity to remove the catered deployment mindset that has permeated our politics for so long. And if the basis for an agreement between the coalition parties says the first thing we're going to do is make sure that people with the right skills and competence fulfill the leadership roles that they're going to exercise their duties to this country on. That's a good values-based decision in the agreement. And how they select the person will have to be centralized around that at every time. And that could have a massive positive impact for the efficiency of the state. There's no doubt, Tom, that there are going to be difficulties because imagine a coalition of 5 parties gunning it out against each other to get as many votes, and the next day they're right, now our coalition needs to work together. And just a week ago they were slating each other. So you put your differences and your egos aside, and this is where I think egos really get in the way in politics, and have a strong agreement and say, now we work for the people and the country. And that's not what's happening in Joburg and Ekurhuleni. The horse trading that is taking place in the background, and as Lukhona says, we have a new mayor who's oblivious to the fact that why do you need an agreement? You need an agreement for something to get you back to. You need an agreement that when you have a fallout, you get around the table, you arbitrate, and you sort this issue out. Because if you don't, then coalition governments become messy, and we have the fallouts that creates this change. And you don't want change at the national level.
No.
You want stability there, because if you have a minister of transport for a year and another minister comes in because there's been a whole overthrow of the cabinet and a new president is elected, well, that becomes messy. But there's dynamics there that I think Michael and Lukhona can add to. So agreements, strong agreements, I think is a necessity, and I do believe that coalitions can work if that is put in place. I'm excited about what is potentially possible in 2024.
We'll get to what our viewers think about coalition governments in just a moment. Write your answer down below the video if you haven't yet. What do you think of a coalition government in 2024 in South Africa? Your thoughts, please, in the comments section. I'll give them to the guests in just a moment. Let me throw the word trust in now. This big word trust. Trust in politicians, trust in political parties, in the system, etc. What do you think the level of trust is when it comes to coalition governments, Wayne, amongst the average South African? Does that require some work, and whose work is it to be done if the trust levels aren't there?
From a coalition government point of view, coalition politics point of view. Yeah, look, I mean, the current fallouts that are happening in Gauteng at local government doesn't do well for trust. And as I said, there's a lot of people saying, well, we don't trust the system, it doesn't work. So what we need to instill trust in the public is sensibility, is less emotion, less low EQ, and more working together. And I think there's an element of that missing. I think what's happening is you get a coalition out of the fact that nobody wants the ANC in power. The DA takes over, and then there seems to be this lack of, and I might be wrong, this lack of, working closely with your partners, treating this as a partnership. And if we can see and make sure that happens, and that there is a respect, there has to be respect for each other in coalitions, the trust will be built. So this is new, and it is the political parties themselves. Now, what happens when you hear the DA saying, look, we could possibly go into coalition with the ANC? Now that to the average person who is an anti, who doesn't want the continuation of the current ruling party's presence in cabinet, that doesn't bode well for trust, does it? So now what happens? Well, there's a new dynamic at play. So I think the political parties have to be obviously very clear up front what they're going to do, and then stick with that. But of course, after the fact, dynamics change so fast that it might make sense to have a coalition with somebody who most of the electorate would regard as the enemy. But they have to spell that out. And this is where I think the public are going to be very skeptical and really worried about what is actually happening. So the more clarity and the more we can see, or the politicians can see which way things are going, and they can form those agreements ahead of time, I think that might instill the trust levels for people to get out there and say, right, I'm behind a coalition, regardless of who wins there. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. We've got a big opportunity. I have to keep saying this, and we mustn't squander it.
Get to your thoughts on national coalition government in just a moment. Underneath the video, pop your comments there. Let me ask Michael about this story of trust. I mean, do you think that political parties are doing themselves a disservice at local level, Michael, with the shenanigans and the stuff we see going on, particularly in Johannesburg, that the level of trust is being eroded by the time they get to national level and say, right, we're going to form a coalition? We're not so sure.
Well, Tom, I think the big thing is, and it was previously mentioned, politics is a system. And unfortunately, our brains have been trained, and it's, a type of system that is worldwide, is that you have these two parties that must fight with each other, opposition politics.
Yeah.
So the one party stands for something, and you must vote against something. So what happens when you go to the polls? It's not that you vote for education or for the values or the policies of a political party. You look at which is your favorite party, and then you go and vote for that. Not for that party, you vote as long as the ANC or the DA doesn't come in.
Like
it's
supporting a football team, like supporting Tottenham Hotspurs, for example.
But in any case, I've had some interesting occasions, because I'll never forget in the years of 1994 even, the National Party at that stage was in government, and the DA was obviously in the opposition, and I was a Christian Democrat. And I'll never forget the National Party made a policy and supported a budget that I thought wasn't a bad budget. And I supported this budget. And then they said to me, you'll forever regret it. You need to learn that if you're in opposition, you can never support something that's presented by a government. You must oppose it. Now, that's the problem that we've got in this country. We need to get our minds past this whole issue of voting against something, and how can we stand together to make a difference? And so those that know me well, I've always been a multi-party person. And I'm hoping that we'll get to a stage that when you talk about coalition governments, it's not an anti-ANC government that all the opposition are going to stand against the ANC. I hope we get to a stage that we can talk about a coalition government, that it's the best people for the job, because you asked it at local government, the best people that are individuals or statesmen and women that can take up positions to take the country forward, or their ward or their constituency forward. So that's where local government is really losing it trust-wise, because it all goes about power. And it's not about the people. It's not where the power is. And that's why we have to change our electoral system, that individuals will more and more be able to vote for a person that represents them. Even if that person represents a political party, we must get direct election, that we choose our best 400 Springboks that can be national government, our provincial legislatures, who is the best team to take us forward. And that will narrow down this aggression of anti-something and rather for something.
Lukhona, do you think that the politicians are aware, as they squabble in the city of Johannesburg, for example, that they're eroding the public's trust in their capability and capacity to run a government together? Are politicians wise to this?
Well, politicians have been eroding public trust for a very, very long time. In actual fact, if you go back and you look at the poor voter turnout in the 2021 local government elections, it was actually an indicator that the electorate, and therefore the citizens, are checking out of a system that prioritizes political parties and political actors. In actual fact, you have a situation where about just over 12 million eligible voters who are registered went out and voted. 14 million registered voters decided to sit at home. 14 million eligible voters
a lot of
just
people,
don't bother to even register at all. So you have a situation where you've got 28 million who just check out on the day and only 12 million participate. This is a crisis of democracy. Because the majority of the eligible voters are just choosing not to participate. And there are a number of things. I mean, if you go back to the 2016 local government elections, for example, part of the issue there were national issues, trust being eroded by a rogue government led by former President Jacob Zuma, and people communicating their disdain to the prevalent corruption, mismanagement of the state, and just abuse of resources through the local vote. And I think that what is going to happen next year is the inverse of 2016, where local issues, where people are really frustrated by things that should be delivered by their municipalities, roads where they're ridden with potholes, lack of water, and then of course the big shadow in the room, which is ESCOM and its power blackouts. But people are going to fight for their stake that, I can't continue to pay so much for cooking oil, and yet there is a government that should be doing something about my state of cost of living. So localized issues are going to be projected to be national issues.
Got it.
But to Michael's point, the other issue that really is fascinating is that when people check out of the ANC, our research is beginning to show that, of course, even through the IEC, but even in focus groups, people don't believe that there's a genuine alternative that can replace the ANC. And part of what descends us to coalition governments and politics is exactly that. Those who would have ordinarily come out to vote for the ANC, they just decide to stay at home and withhold their vote. And there are very few who shift and go to other opposition parties. So our current opposition parties are not even geared towards attracting and convincing those disaffected voters. And over time, you then have what we call lapsed ANC voters, who may have last voted in 2016 for the ANC, didn't vote in 2019 for it, didn't vote in 2021. And part of making the switch towards 2024 is going to be about how do you make sure that people who used to participate electorally are inspired to come back and communicate their views and communicate the direction in which they want the country to go. But yes, you are quite correct. Can that inspiration come from within the current actors? I don't think so. When people feel that politics is becoming petty, it's about bickering on personalities and personal issues, and people are wondering that, in some of these metros, what has emerged as what could be seen as the parties that can cooperate together is Action SA and the DA. But it seems like, historical baggage is being allowed, to define that relationship and redefine it to a point that sometimes it makes it difficult for them to cooperate, because I sometimes wonder, those in Action SA, they probably ask, why is it a priority that we partner with the very same DA that we decided to leave and Marseille? And that's why there was a big debate towards the end of last year as to whether or not Action SA could go into a coalition government with the ANC, and the leader there, Herman Mashaba, coming out quite seriously to say if there were to be a vote and Action SA said they want a coalition with the ANC, he would resign. So one of the things that we are struggling with, and I think because we are trying to emerge out of a state of poor governance by the ANC, running down the corruption, endemic corruption, and running down the economy and endemic corruption. The ANC is not a trusted partner. In mature democracies where coalition governments have been around for some time, you find that, the configuration of those coalitions is quite interesting. You'll find Greens going with fairly conservative parties that are quite,
not always the obvious partnerships. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it needs you to get to a point of maturity. But I wonder, though, look, at the national level, much will be at stake. And I think maybe that could be the thing that makes people sober up and act in the best interests of the country. But yes, I accept that the current shenanigans in various municipalities and the tantrums that just get thrown up. The EFF, for example, asking its deputy mayors in KwaZulu-Natal to withdraw simply because the IFP just sent a very scathing and robust statement. Those are quite, irresponsible forms of action.
Yeah, perhaps opposition parties should take note of what the man on the street is saying. And I bump into more and more people every day who said, I won't vote for that party anymore. I'll vote for someone that I didn't even think I'd ever vote for. You start hearing more of that. It indicates the dissatisfaction that people have got in politics and politicians. And if opposition parties just took note of that, perhaps they would behave differently. Okay, let's get to your comments. What do you think about opposition politics 2024 at a national level? Claire Feldman says, unfortunately, local government councillors seem to be more interested in gaining access to the budgets rather than taking care of local issues. So people pointing to local government. Abin Seda says, an example is Gauteng. The new mayor has not been heard of before. His credentials are suspect. Who's pulling the strings in the background? Alex Elshope says, too much horse trading for power, not enough focus on service delivery. We got Peter Mayberg who says coalition governments can work, but we have too many parties that can break up a coalition, i.e. the EFF. We need more stable parties that look out for the people and not to line their own pockets. Stability is very important. Pierre de Villiers says, Outer, in the near future, yes. In the long run, bigger parties will rise and smaller ones will disappear. Madeline says, I think it could work, but there should be a rotational system for all. I look for one or two more here. Mike Cohen says the ANC will not go quietly, and I'd like to pick up on this point. And this is something I've heard from a number of people, that this big giant we call the ANC will not disappear quietly. Wayne, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'll come to that now. It's a good question. I just want to touch on what Lekhona was saying now, and I'd like Lekhona's views and maybe Michael's on this. I agree that the opposition parties are not doing themselves any favors, and I think, and Lekhona, help me understand this, but I just cannot see why the DA believes that John Steenhuisen as their presidential candidate is going to take up or give an alternative option to many of the past ANC supporters, as you said, who's now stopped because they just can't bring themselves to vote for the ANC because of the current state. And so there's this attitude of, well, I don't really connect with anybody else, so therefore I won't vote. And we've got to change that mindset. But then the oppositions are just not paving the way for those opportunities. But is this true, Lekhona, that if we could get the vote to turn out higher in this current scenario, in other words, the ANC voters who stay away now believe there is an alternative. And I've always said, vote for the least bad, just vote, don't not vote. If that number goes up, I think the last election turnout was 66% of the registered voters, a lot less if you took those that should have registered. And that's about 7% down on the previous national elections. So in 2019, 66, if you could push that over 70 again, getting people out of their comfort zones, that does tend to push the ANC's percentage down, does it not? That theory. Is that
well, Wayne, I mean, not only just in theory. If you observe the recent local government by-elections in 2022, a number of the wards that might have been won by, for example, by the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal, by the EFF in some pockets, Northwest, and I think in Gauteng, you find that when voter turnout increases from the previous local government election, the ANC tends to suffer a decline, even with the current political parties, which then means that, yes, some parties must work on getting the vote out, as it were. So two things for me are going to be indicative in 2024. The first is the number of newly registered voters. So if you want to see whether an election might be a game changer, you can detect it by the number of people who have an appetite to be registered to participate in that election. So, for example, if you take the presidential race in Nigeria that's going to conclude this month of February, last year, just over 11 million new voters were registered into the voters' roll, and 72% of those were young people, and they were responding to the brutality of the state through police when they were demonstrating and the violence meted out against them. So that gave them a motivation to actually register so that they can, now the question is, of that new cohort of voters, 11 million of them, how many will you be able to turn out on election day? And that's why, even though the polling there is quite bad and not reliable, but some indications are saying Obi suddenly has an opportunity where he might not have had an opportunity fighting against the establishment of the likes of Buhari and others who are established political players in the Nigerian scene. So that's the first voter registration. Then voter turnout of those newly registered voters. If we accept that those who decide not to turn out, for example, for the ANC because they are aggrieved with it, they just simply stay at home, the newly registered voters become a diluting factor that turns out. So in that instance, then you've got a very dynamic outcome that you can anticipate. So it is quite true, and I don't think it's only in theory, Wayne, that we should look at it that way. The question is, what would turn out, disaffected ANC voters? And somebody has said this to me, and I take his views quite seriously. He said, part of the problem is that opposition parties tend to want to bash the ANC rather than to develop a moral idea that would substitute the ANC. And said, the moral idea of the ANC generally appeals to any level-headed person, non-racial, non-sexist, prosperous and democratic society. That's the society we all want to live in. So instead of bashing the ANC, present an alternative moral idea, and that's what his advice was. The last thing I'm going to say on this, Tom, is that the problem with the DA, and I'm doing a lot of research, focus groups around the country. First of all, John Steenhuisen has a serious problem. As a leader of the DA, who has been there now since 2019 and was chief whip before that, so has all the publicity you can think of, John Steenhuisen just has poor brand recognition.
What? Nobody loves him?
Nobody knows him. Love is another thing.
Nobody knows him? Really?
Him. No. You'll do focus groups, and it's across the racial groups. Some people will say, you mean the ESCOM guy, the sport guy. So he has a problem really where he has not connected with a number of in fact, former leaders of the DA like your Musi Maimane have far better brand recognition than John Steenhuisen with ordinary people. And I think that's a serious risk for the DA. But let me throw a spanner in the works, Wayne. I think if a coalition were to be put up and the DA was to occupy the presidential seat, I think I'm beginning to say Helen Zille will fight that she has far more governance experience and she must be the presidential candidate.
All right. Well, what do you think of that, Michael? Michael, you there?
You're on mute. Yeah, he's on mute.
I think Lacuna was hit the nail on the head. It's absolutely perfect regarding what he said. And, brand recognition is just so important, and the caliber of the people that are standing and things. So what Lacuna said, I really totally support everything that he said. The only thing is that I would like to add is that nobody really is addressing it here, is the power of political parties on the freedom of members of that political party to actually act what they believe is in the best interest of the country. And, being in a political party, I know how that power operates.
Sure.
It really goes about what's best for the leaders, and so they go and they manipulate everything. It's interesting. You would have seen now the EFF has also just done a very interesting high-level executive decision that with the provincial conference, all their members of parliament and their provincial legislature members are asked to resign if they didn't win the nominations of their electorate in the last election. I'm talking about the elections in the party. Now, it's very interesting that you're saying that, because how do you sort of govern that? Now, these individuals that have given their lives for consistency, making a difference and all that. Now the political parties are making these high-level decisions and don't give you freedom. And I think political parties need to change their internal structures of how they operate, because I can think more and more political parties are struggling, and that's why internally there's more power fighting internally. You would have seen that the past executive mayor of Johannesburg is now contesting for the leadership of John Steenhuisen because they believe he hasn't got brand recognition. So what happens now? They're not worrying about exercising service delivery and how to make a difference to Johannesburg.
They're fighting for the top spot.
It's now all fighting for the top spot and the energy that's needed for that.
Yeah.
It's power bases. And I think we need to change that system. And that's something that really worries me a lot.
I love that word energy. And when applied to politics, where are our politicians putting their energy? If they put in energy into fighting each other, nothing's going to come out of it. Fernando Lopez reminds us that these are the painful steps of a young democracy. And I'd like to ask you, Michael, if you can provide some examples of a successful coalition government. Any examples you've got of coalition successes around the world that might serve as inspiration for South Africans?
Well, look, I mean, the German models, I think the European models are really great. Ireland is really a great, the Irish government is great. And they, funny enough, they've got a very, very high percentage of independent candidates, and it's growing. I just wanted to say, not that I'm wanting to push the independent agenda, but more and more governments, you would have seen it in Australia, that more independents are getting, where the electorate are choosing independents to I don't want to say stabilize coalition governments, but adding to the credibility of the government, because independents are stabilize a lot. So I would say the German have got a very strong coalition and mature government, and there they focus exactly what is my two colleagues have said about pre-agreements, coalition agreements that are so important. I don't know how you operate without them, but I would say Ireland and Germany are the two standouts for me of really successful coalition governments.
Got it. Pop says coalition is a reality and so is instability. Pops adds that we need a social compact between civil society and political parties to ensure the kind of shenanigans playing out now don't occur at national and provincial level. Bruce Stewart disagrees, says there's no future to coalition governments in South Africa. The ANC will continue to manipulate the minor parties. There's more in that comment. You can read it in the comment section down below. Lily Basher says opposition parties do not seem to understand what their role is as opposition. And I would like to know about scenarios. I mean, I want to cast our minds forward a year and a bit and ask you, what do you think is going to happen next year? And if there is a higher voter turnout, do you agree that means the ANC will get a lower percentage? Let's start with Lukhona. What do you think is going to happen next year?
Well, at the Rivonia Circle, we conducted a study with Ipsos Machino last year, June, July. And that study was a study that simply focused on registered voters, 2,000 participants, and it was nationally representative. And the voter turnout of that study, in terms of people who were certain that if there were to be an election today, they would go out and vote, was at 65%. So just a percentage lower than 2019. And the ANC was polling at just above 42%. And that meant, it would need a coalition partner. Of course, the EFF was above 10% as well, which means they could be a potential coalition partner. If you see what is happening in the city of Johannesburg, what was attempted in the city of Ekurhuleni to try and negotiate between the EFF and the ANC, it's quite clear that there is an indication of a future possible cooperation. There are two events that are going to, and so I think that is where the ANC might end up, 42%. The only event that would harm the ANC is if President Ramaphosa does not make it to Christmas this year. If you look carefully, the ANC is standing on the credibility of President Ramaphosa. So Ipsos Machino actually made a presentation to the EFF's plenum or leadership this past weekend. And what you can see quite evidently is that President Ramaphosa's trust level is at about, say, minus, I don't have the figure with me, but let's say -3. The ANC's trust level amongst the people who were polled, they polled eligible voters, which means both unregistered and registered. The ANC's trust level is about -10. There's a 7-point difference between Ramaphosa and the ANC.
Wow.
But with other leaders like, your Action SA and Herman Mashaba, John Steenhuisen and the DA, there's only a 1-point difference, Julius Malema and the EFF. But they lag Ramaphosa by so much. He's at -3. The next guy is at about -27. So what you have here is a situation where the ANC knows its prospects hang on them hanging on to President Ramaphosa. But if anything happens in the course of the year around Phala, the president decides to resign for whatever reason, the ANC will be in a far worse situation in the build-up to the 2024 election. And I think that they might find it very difficult to even make it to about 35% of the vote.
Michael, your predictions looking ahead, 2024?
Tommy, that's all very interesting. Well, definitely our surveys are showing that the ANC are under the 50% and, also around about the 42% mark. I think my scenario is that I'm really concerned about the level of consistency of the ANC going in with the two following parties, either the DA or the EFF. I am worried about what Julius Malema said, because a lot of people say they won't do anything with the ANC. But I recall hearing Julius Malema saying he'll kiss a frog when it comes to getting power. So it's those type of things that really worry me. But I can say to you that I see that there could be a deal made between the ANC and the DA. But my prediction is that even although there might be that deal, and I know a lot of economists and futurists and things are thinking the two bigger parties is a mature democracy, is what happens in Europe and should happen. I'm afraid that I do not hold a partnership like that in good stead. I don't think it will last. I think the values are too different. They're not aligned. They might do the deal, but I give it a couple of months. So my type of, if I could rather go to a wish list, not what's going to happen.
Sure.
I really would love to see a multi-party democracy. I would love to see a man that nobody knows comes in and stands as a leader for this country, and he chooses a cabinet that's made up of a team of 20 of key people that are competent, and he says, listen, guys, let's have a multi-party democracy, 3 from the ANC, 3 from the DA, 3 from the IFP, and he makes his government of the best people, and he says, we've been too divided for too long, let's give 5 years and make this country a great country. So that's my wish list.
Wayne, wow. Do you think it's possible for the ANC to turn this around, Wayne? And the reason I mention this is a comment in the YouTube feed by Vutzako who says load shedding will bring the voters out. Is that perhaps why there's this push to get those car power ships in and get rid of load shedding? I mean, if you got rid of load shedding, you'd be today's hero, and that may swing things about. What are your predictions for the future or your wishes, Wayne?
Yeah, no, very much so. I like Michael Louis' analogy, and if we could get that, Michael, that would be utopia. But something says that's a bridge too far. Hopefully it does become a reality. Yeah, look, I think if load shedding is around a month or in the lead up to the elections, like it is right now, so the elections are happening now, it is going to be a motivating factor. People are fed up, and it might swing this, might get the turnout higher and the ANC weaker to swing a stronger coalition option. And possibly that is one of the motivating factors. We think it's other things that are going to do this car power ships deal if they want. I mean, Gwede Mantashe is punting for it like you cannot believe. And he's making comments like, well, okay, if we don't do 20 years, then if the length of period is the issue, then it's 10 years, but then you must know the cost per kilowatt hour is going to go up. And you sort of say, well, what's informing you of this now, Gwede? Or are you having a quiet chat behind the scenes with the car power ships? I mean, this is ludicrous stuff. And 10 years is still too much for an emergency issue that we believe the matter can be resolved in the next 3 to 5 years. So, but maybe it is a factor that says, look, and we just cannot allow this at any cost. And we need absolute transparency. And already in court, we're in court now. We've laid our papers, I think, today or this week, compelling NERSA to give us the record of decision on the car power ships matter. And they are doing everything they can to withhold that information. So there's a lack of transparency. We want to see the numbers. We want to see how they arrived at, well, this was pre-Ukraine war prices of gas prices, bringing a 220 billion rand, over 20 years noose around our neck. Now, you can imagine what those prices are now. We need to know, how do they arrive at that? Because these are the types of deals where middlemen and facilitation fees become big. These are the kinds of deals, Tom, that make a ruling party get very rich very quickly before an election so that they can swing things around. And this is what we've got to watch out. The ANC is broke, and it has an opportunity, a short window of opportunity now, to get as much money out of the system as it can. We know that the ANC has been funded through deals that are dubious, the Hitachi deal being one through Chancellor House, and others, many others. And we speculate on others that we don't even want to talk about. So this is our biggest concern, and that might be a factor, absolutely.
Lukhona, do you think we still vote on skin color, the race-based politics, or are we moving away from that?
That's a very, very difficult question. One thing
That's
that
why
I
I
will
left
tell
it
you
to
though
last.
is,
Yeah.
clearly to catch us off guard. But look, one thing I'll tell you again, drawing from the research that I've been involved with in the past year, is that race is still top of mind of certain people. I also think that it's not just to probe the voter, but it's also to probe the political actors. I'll make an example about the Democratic Alliance. I always say to people, if you look at the evolution of the Democratic Alliance as far back as the 1930s, one thing that has always been a tradition in the Democratic Alliance's evolution is what I call mergers and acquisitions. So you always get parties coming together, forming a new party, give it a new name, and it evolves right up to the formation of the Democratic Alliance. But those parties were all white parties. The crisis in the Democratic Alliance came when there was now a flood of black participants. They started fighting for certain values. They added a fourth value, which was highly contested in the Democratic Alliance, the value of diversity. The next natural step was to then create an alliance from the insiders, which were largely white people, and the outsiders that had now come and were fighting for a stake, black people, and do the merger and acquisition and reformulate the Democratic Alliance. I think had they allowed themselves to be true to their tradition of growth, they would have been much further than they are today. Of course, you will have seen in the past weekend that the ANC co-opted a number of people like Gerard Korenhoff and Alvin Botes, because they are saying our NEC is not diverse enough. So you put this thing to a vote, but we've elected an NEC of 80 people where there's only one person, Babta Krisi, there's only one colored person, Tina Jumet Peterson. So it's not just about the voters, it's also what the political actors have been communicating to the voters for some time. And I think we need a serious conversation. But one thing I can leave you as a point of hope, though, is that South Africans are calling, again in the research that we do, that's the only thing I can reference as a point. They want unity. They want leaders who speak about a collective. They want a leadership that actually defines the national ethos to be inclusive. And I think for me in the past year, that has given me hope that South Africans, mindful of all the racial and divisive things in our political landscape, they detest politicians who continue to divide them, because I think for some time they've now seen the cost of being divided and are probably seeking refuge in the collective and the idea of national unity.
What a lovely point to end on, Lukhona. Lukhona, thank you for joining us tonight. Lukhona Mnguni is the head of policy and research at the Rivonia Circle. And wow, what a fascinating conversation with you this evening. Thank you, Lukhona. 30 seconds or so each to Dr. Michael Louis and Wayne Duvenage. Michael, could you wrap up your thoughts and comments for our viewers tonight, please?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And, I think we've come a long way. Definitely the political landscape when I was there in 1994, we've matured just so much. We've seen so much. We've experienced so much. I think this new democracy or this new season we're going in, I've seen and really respected the involvement of the public and social engagement and social movements. And I really want to take off my hat because I've seen the debates and the contributions in the bills that are published. There's much more interest that's come from the public, from the ground. Unfortunately, the greatest dilemma in our country is that we haven't seen corporate business society standing up.
Yeah.
I still don't understand what we're going to do
Cowards.
to get them engaged.
Yes.
I don't really know that. And then when there are certain business individuals that are standing up, they get fired and they get shot at. I really believe it's something that corporate society must stand up. There's a few individuals that are fighting on their behalf for their interests, and I really believe they need to be engaged. But lastly, I've got so much hope for our country, and my call is for courageous statesmen and women, especially our young people, to be engaged, to be educated, and to together that we have to, as leaders, set the example and hand over the baton to the new generation. We're passionate about them, but they need to have the heart and the willingness to take that baton and lead this country for the next few years.
What a pleasure having you on the show tonight, Dr. Michael Louis. Thank you for joining us, the chairperson of One South Africa. Thank you. And Wayne, you closed the show tonight.
Yeah, so great. I love those points. And I think we didn't get onto discussing this a lot. Lukhona would have some views on this, but it is the new voters, this is the youth, and they seem to be absent when it comes to elections in South Africa far too often. There's a big challenge for us there. If we can get new voters, get our election roll up, and get the youth out there to vote. To Michael's point, the youth now need to be involved in the future of this country, and I think Rivonia Circle doing a lot of good work in that space. So looking forward to an interesting year, an interesting election that's going to come up. Watch the politicking and watch the pushback by the ANC. As somebody said in the comments, they're not going to go lightly. It is going to be a fight. There's going to be a lot of horse trading. And I just hope that it's done sensibly without the damage that it could possibly do to the country. Looking forward to it. Thanks to all our supporters out there. Without you, we can't be as successful as we are. So keep on spreading the word on Outer's work. And thanks to Lukhona. Thanks, Michael. It's been a great show.
And that's the CEO of Outer, Wayne Duvenage, ending the show this evening with his thoughts. And I'm going to leave the last comment on screen for a couple of seconds from Caesar Tonkin. Nation building is so crucial now. Isn't that our greatest wish as South Africans, that we build a great country, that we don't fight over the pieces of it and break it in the process? I wish you a wonderful 7 days, because in 7 days we're going to meet again for another Outer Hour. 7 p.m. on Wednesdays is when it happens. We'll have some more guests, some more insightful topics, and more to talk about. Thank you for your contributions down below the video in the comments section. Been loving the comments in the comments section. Hope you've had a good time with Samantha and Masejo. We'll see you again next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Until then, lots of luck, lots of love, lots of money, lots of health. And it's a date, 7 p.m. next Wednesday for another Outer Hour. I'm Tom London, and I miss you already.
Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.